in South America to meet with the members of Iron Maiden, one of my all-time favorite bands, and is now actually one of the biggest bands on the planet. But the thing about Iron Maiden is that their roots lie in a movement called the New Wave of British Heavy Metal, which was this explosion of bands back in the early 80s in England. But what I've never really understood is what exactly was the New Wave of British Heavy Metal, and what's its contribution to the development of metal music. Filling stadiums in South America. Back in 1980, when they released their first record, they were considered the leaders of the new wave of British heavy metal, or Nawabo, as it's called. But Maiden actually got their start in the mid-70s. And what I've always wanted to know is, what was the musical climate like in England at that time? Why do you think it took that time to get to that point and release that first album?
I think it was just purely because of what was happening, or not happening, in our case, with the music biz at the time. We were around before the punk thing, but then the punk thing happened sort of around 77. All the punk bands were getting the gigs, and anything that was remotely more mainstream rock wasn't even looked at anymore, you know. So it was really tough for bands at the time. I remember going down to a gig, you know, so in West London, and we went in there and it was just people just diving about all over the place, spitting over the band and all this. We just hated everything about it. Absolutely everything.
Maybe punk could be credited with at least bringing speed.
I'm sorry, can't credit it with anything.
Come on, no. Steve.
No, we hated it.
Don't believe
we
it.
Absolutely hated it.
In 1977, punk was exploding in England, and it also happened to be the same year as the Queen's Silver Jubilee. And to take the piss, the Sex Pistols famously rented a boat on the Thames River. But why I'm interested in punk is because there's a lot of folklore around the animosity between metal and punk in the late 70s. So what I want to understand is, what exactly was the relationship between these two styles of music?
Just for you, here's a love song. Next time to say, it's been a lovely day, it's
okay. What was different about metal compared to punk in the late 70s?
Metal players they're metal riffs. We were much more kind of, almost not bluesy, but sort of rock and roll, kind of traditional based in the way we viewed the notes we played. There was kind of a great kindred that we had with like the Stooges and the MC5, but the similarities really were only in volume.
Why ultimately were you attracted to going more the punk direction than the metal?
Because it was mine. It was my generation. It was what I wanted to do. And you know, we didn't play as good as some of those guys either. I think we were grateful that we could get something out that sounded like a song.
Just for you, here's a love song, and it makes time to say, it's been a lovely day, and it's okay.
and punk fans coexisting peacefully, or was there actual real conflict there?
It's a bit like two snarling dogs in a cage, you know. They'll look at each other, they'll size each other up, and then after a while they kind of back down and get used to each other being there, and then it's, oh, well, maybe his butt doesn't sniff so bad after all.
Mid-70s, when it kicked off, it was very much a them or us culture. You didn't mix, you didn't attempt to mix, and if you did mix, there could be trouble. I've had bottles thrown at me as I've walked past clubs, purely for the crime of wearing a denim jacket.
Being a rock guy yourself, how did you feel about punk?
I hated it. Yeah, I don't see the pleasure of spitting on people and things like that. It ruined proper music.
Metal musicians in England in the late 70s seemed to have a very different musical philosophy than their punk counterparts. But given that Nawabum came directly on the heels of punk, I'm wondering if all metalers shared this perspective. So I'm meeting with Brian Tatler, guitarist for the influential Nawabum band Diamond Head, to get a deeper understanding of how heavy metalers felt about punk.
I liked punk. I thought it was very important for the music scene. I think it got rid of a lot of the deadwood. There seemed to be like prog bands were getting out of control, bands like Yes, making double albums and triple albums. You could only see these bands if you went to see them at Wembley. They were like gods from another planet or something. You didn't breathe the same air as Led Zeppelin. But suddenly you could go and watch a punk band in a club, and yeah, the excitement, the energy. I think it gave thousands of kids the idea that you go and make your own music, go and get a guitar. Instead of having this incredible benchmark of, say, Deep Purple to live up to, suddenly I could play the guitar like maybe Steve Jones from the Sex Pistols.
It appealed to kids. You know, kids want noise, you know, and they want power, and they want whatever is the in thing, you know, and that's what was the in thing at the time.
Why were the media and the labels so infatuated with this thing called punk?
They want the next big thing, because this will make them money. So when something happens, and the Sex Pistols happen big time through their TV interview, everyone thinks, we'll have one of those. Not what's happening next, but want one of those, want one of those now.
The Vapors, turning Japanese.
People I talk to often talk about how the punk explosion was fairly short-lived. Is that fair?
Punk kind of died as soon as it went mainstream. Every little went out and bought a leather jacket and cut their hair and put safety pins through their cheeks. I think they got very focused on how to be successful. This is how they do it with, you know, pop acts. This is how it works in the mainstream. We just have to apply the same rules to our band.
These former anarchists, if you like, had become big label, million-selling artists. Out of punk, you kind of got the indie, jangly guitar, and to a certain extent, the new romantic movement as well. So there was a real kind of end point there, and it's like, right, okay, what's coming next, or what can we do next that's really going to rock?
By the end of the 70s, punk in England had gone mainstream, and it was no longer a defiant, underground music movement. So now that punk's authenticity was waning, how would the new wave of British heavy metal get its start? One of the biggest legends in the history of the new wave of British heavy metal is that its origins can be traced to a London venue called the Bandwagon, where DJ and hard rock enthusiast Neil Kay apparently kickstarted the Nawabum movement.
What was the state of music at that point? I'm thinking 78, 79.
It was punk or nothing at the time. And these rock bands, these youngsters, some of them were only kids. They had nowhere to go, no one to move the product higher, no one to press it, print it, release it and get it there. And it began to get me really annoyed. I'd always dreamed of a place, whilst working in the London clubs and going to like live gigs and things, that there should be rock available to the people. And you could turn everything round. 180 degrees and throw everyone out that wore a tie and shirt and demand that jeans only were worn and only T-shirts. I had this massive sound system there. It wasn't a discotheque club system. It was a band PA. And it could blow windows out. What I kind of realised in the end was that I'd grown a whole culture of rock and roll loonies. I kept phoning up Sounds, which was the big metal rock paper of the time. In the end, Jeff Barton took notice. I said to him, if you come up, you will not be disappointed. I will show you something you have never seen before.
The concept of a rock club, you know, full of you know, long-haired oiks, you know, getting their rocks off to you know, the likes of Ted Nugent, was pretty much inconceivable circa 1978, 1979.
When we saw the results, it was astonishing. He'd put a centre-page double spread about us in Sounds. And Jeff came to me one day and said, would you be interested in doing a heavy metal chart for the paper every week?
He wasn't just playing your Rush and Judas Priest, but he would actually take a chance and throw all this new stuff into the mix, like Praying Mantis, like Iron Maiden.
We made a tape and we took it down to Neil Kay's Soundhouse, mainly to try and get a gig, not for any other reason really. We just wanted to get a gig there because we knew that it was a good place for our core fans, rock fans.
Steve said to me something like, do us a favour, mate, take it home and give it a listen, and if you like it, give us a ring.
And when you listen to the Maiden tape...
Went mad. Went absolutely berserk.
He started playing the tracks off the tape in his chart, and then all of a sudden, our tracks start going up the chart until, you get number one, Proud as number one and all this stuff. Me and Paul actually went down there one night just to see what would happen, when they played one of our tracks. Of course, we weren't known then or anything like that, so we was just able to stand at the bar and watch what was going on. And the whole place just went crazy when the Maiden tracks come on.
The Maiden tape was awe-inspiring. I don't know how else to put it. It was, well, here's a band waiting to smack the world. Of course, convincing the labels that was a different story.
As always, you'd aim for a record deal, a big record deal, and you heard of your EMIs and your CBSs. But indie labels came out around the time of punk rock. It'd never been heard of before. It gave it a different idea that you could make your own record and you might be able to get a distributor and you could sell it yourself or sell it at specialist record shops.
When Soundhouse tapes, I thought, we'll put it out because punk bands were putting out their own records. Steve actually did all the writing, logos and everything, and I called it Rock Hard Records, and it was a direct riff-off from Stiff. Stiff Records was, if it ain't stiff, it ain't worth a ours was, if it ain't rock hard, it ain't worth a, So, yeah, we took stuff from punk, yeah.
Punk things seem to have established this DIY attitude. Do you think you were inspired by how the punk...
We were inspired by nothing, anything to do with punk. We just didn't want have anything to do with it at all.